Actually, Becca, Ricardo said, his voice dropping all pretense of professionalism, we need to discuss a clause in your contract. He pulled out a copy and flipped to page 14. There, buried in legal terminology I'd been too naive to understand, was language about exclusive performance obligations and breach penalties. You see, when models don't fulfill their contractual commitments, there are financial consequences. Specifically, you owe us $50,000 in training costs, promotional materials, and lost revenue. My blood turned to ice. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I never agreed to owe you money. Page 16, paragraph C, he said calmly, running his manicured finger along the text. Your signature is right there. Witnessed and notarized. One of the suited men stepped closer. He was massive, with hands like cinder blocks and a scar running from his ear to his jaw. His name tag read Vincent, though I doubted that was real. When he smiled, I noticed a gold tooth that caught the light menacingly. Of course, there are ways to work off the debt, Ricardo continued, adjusting his expensive watch. These gentlemen have very specific entertainment needs, and our online clients are always eager for fresh content. I understood then. This wasn't modeling. It was trafficking. Organized, sophisticated, and completely legal according to the contract I'd stupidly signed. The room felt like it was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my friendship with Destiny, about my future, it was all crashing down around me. The expensive art on the walls suddenly looked sinister, like it was watching me. The classical music playing softly in the background seemed mocking. I thought about running, but we were miles from civilization on a private estate surrounded by high walls topped with what I now realized was razor wire. I thought about screaming, but who would hear me? My phone showed no signal. I was completely trapped in what looked like a luxury prison. Destiny knew about this, didn't she? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, small and defeated. Ricardo laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with genuine amusement. Destiny's been our top recruiter for 2 years. She gets a $5,000 bonus for every girl she brings in, plus 20% of their first-year earnings. You were just her latest paycheck, and her biggest score yet. The betrayal hit harder than the fear. My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world, had sold me to traffickers. Every late-night conversation about our dreams, every study session where she'd helped me with organic chemistry, every time she'd comforted me when I was homesick or stressed about exams, it had all been manipulation. She'd been grooming me for this moment for months, maybe even years. She's probably at the Four Seasons Spa right now, spending her commission, Vincent said with a cruel smile that revealed too many teeth. She always celebrates after successful deliveries. Last month, she got a full-body massage and facial after bringing us twin sisters from USC. I felt like I was going to vomit. Deliveries. That's what I was to them. A package to be delivered and used until I broke. How many other girls? I managed to ask, wrapping my arms around myself as if that could provide some protection. Destiny's recruited 11 girls this year alone, Ricardo said proudly, consulting his phone where I could see a spreadsheet with names and photos. She's particularly good at targeting students with financial stress. Pre-med students like you are perfect. Desperate for money, isolated from family, with demanding schedules that make disappearances easier to explain. The photographer, a thin man with yellowed teeth who kept adjusting his camera equipment like it was a weapon, laughed. Your friend even gave us your class schedule, your work hours, your professors' names. She said you never had time for a social life, so no one would miss you for days, maybe even weeks. My mind reeled. Destiny knew exactly when I'd be vulnerable, when I'd be most tempted by easy money. She'd even encouraged me to pick up extra shifts at work, knowing it would make me more desperate for income. All those times she'd complained about being broke. All those nights she'd come home with expensive takeout and new clothes. She'd been living off the suffering of other women. She also told us about your family, Ricardo added casually, as if discussing the weather. Parents who work 2 jobs each just to make ends meet. No college fund, no safety net. She said you'd do anything to avoid burdening them with more debt. That was true. My parents had sacrificed everything to help me get this far in school. The last thing I wanted was to call them begging for money, or to drop out because I couldn't afford to continue. Very thoughtful friend, Vincent said, cracking his knuckles. She even mentioned your mother's medical bills from last year's cancer scare, said it would be easy to motivate you with the right financial pressure. But I'd learned something important during my pre-med studies. When you're in a life-threatening situation, your brain either panics or becomes incredibly focused. Mine chose focus, probably because the alternative was complete breakdown. I started cataloging everything I could see. The mansion had expensive art on the walls. Originals, not prints. Picasso sketches, what looked like a small Monet, sculptures that probably cost more than most people's houses. The furniture was antique, the kind you see in museums. This wasn't some seedy operation run by small-time criminals. This was organized, well-funded, and probably connected to legitimate businesses. There were cameras already set up in the room, professional equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars, multiple angles, different lenses, lighting rigs that could be adjusted for various scenarios. A computer station in the corner had multiple monitors showing what looked like streaming software, chat rooms, and payment processing systems. They weren't just trafficking women, they were filming it and selling the footage to a global audience in real time. I need to use the bathroom, I said as calmly as possible, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Ricardo nodded to Vincent, who escorted me to a powder room off the main hallway. The bathroom was marble and gold, with fixtures that probably cost more than my tuition, towels that felt like silk, soap that smelled like French perfume, a mirror with Hollywood-style lighting. But I wasn't admiring the decor. I was looking for weapons. A heavy crystal vase sat on the counter, filled with white orchids that looked freshly cut. The window was too small to escape through, but I could see part of the circular driveway and what looked like a gatehouse with armed security in the distance. Even if I could get outside, there was nowhere to run. The estate was probably miles from the nearest neighbor, but the vase gave me an idea. Next to it was a smaller crystal dish that held decorative soaps. I palmed one of the soap dishes. It was heavy with sharp edges, about the size of my palm. When I came out, I stumbled slightly, letting the vase slip from my hands. It shattered against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, crystal fragments scattering everywhere. Sorry, I said, kneeling to pick up pieces. I'm just really nervous. While pretending to clean up, I palmed a shard of crystal about 4 inches long with a razor-sharp edge. I slipped it into my back pocket, praying none of them had noticed. Enough games, Ricardo said, checking his expensive watch. Our first client is already logged in and waiting. Time to get started. He led me to what used to be a living room but was now set up like a movie set, complete with cameras, lights, and what looked like a bed covered in silk sheets. My stomach dropped as I realized they were planning to film whatever they did to me. The setup was more elaborate than I'd initially thought. There were multiple camera angles, professional lighting rigs that could be controlled remotely, and even a makeup station stocked with products. This wasn't amateur hour. It was a full production studio designed for one horrifying purpose. Behind the cameras, I could see computer monitors showing chat rooms where usernames were already bidding on what they wanted to see happen to me. The amounts were sickeningly high. Thousands of dollars for specific acts, more money for violence, astronomical sums for things I didn't want to imagine. Here's how this works, Ricardo explained, consulting a tablet that showed what looked like a detailed spreadsheet of names, photos, and financial information. You perform for our cameras, and your debt decreases by $2,000 per session. Simple math. You'll only need to work for us for about 2 years to pay off what you owe. 2 years. 730 days of rape and torture, filmed for the entertainment of sick men around the world. And that was assuming they didn't add additional fees or penalties to keep me trapped longer. What if I refuse? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. The photographer laughed. Then your debt increases by $5,000 per day for room and board, security services, and lost revenue, plus interest. Do the math, sweetheart. You'd never get out. The largest man stepped forward, already unbuttoning his shirt. He had tattoos covering his arms, not artistic ones, but the crude prison variety. Numbers on his neck that I recognized as gang identifiers from a criminology class I'd taken as an elective. Scars on his hands that looked like knife fights. Actually, I said, backing toward the window, I have a better idea. I pulled out the crystal shard and pressed it against my wrist, hard enough to draw blood. The sharp edge bit into my skin like a scalpel, and crimson drops began falling onto the expensive Persian rug. One more step and I'll slice my arteries open. Your cameras will record me bleeding out on your floor. Try explaining that to the police. They froze. Vincent's hand moved towards something under his jacket, probably a gun, but Ricardo held up a hand to stop him. You're bluffing, Ricardo said, but his voice wavered. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the perfectly controlled air conditioning. Am I? I pressed harder, letting more blood flow. The pain was sharp but manageable, nothing compared to what they had planned for me. I'm pre-med. I know exactly where to cut to hit the radial and ulnar arteries. I'd have about 3 minutes before losing consciousness, maybe 8 before brain death. Even if you called 911 right now, they'd never make it up that winding road in time. The men looked at each other uncertainly. This wasn't part of their plan. They were used to terrified, helpless victims, not someone willing to die rather than submit. Even if you manage to save me, I'll be damaged goods. You can't sell a girl covered in self-inflicted scars to your clients. And the medical attention would mean police involvement, hospital records, investigations into how I got hurt. I had their full attention now. Ricardo was calculating, probably trying to figure out how much money my death would cost him versus the risk of letting me go. But I have a proposition. Let me leave, destroy any footage you've taken of me today, and I'll disappear quietly. No police, no media attention, no problems for your business. And if we don't agree? The photographer asked, his finger hovering over his camera's record button. I smiled grimly and showed them my bleeding wrist, letting drops fall onto the white silk sheets they'd prepared for my assault. Then you explain to your clients why there's a dead teenager in your premium content. Nothing kills the mood like a suicide, and nothing attracts police attention like an unexplained death at a registered business address. Ricardo was sweating heavily now. He'd built his operation on secrecy and control. A suicide would destroy everything. The location would be compromised, the police would investigate, and his client list would be exposed. How do we know you won't go to the police anyway? He demanded. Because I'm smart enough to know you'd kill me before I could testify, but I'm also smart enough to have insurance. I pulled out my phone with my free hand, being careful not to let the crystal shard slip. Before I lost signal driving up here, I sent a message to my study group explaining where I was going, who I was meeting, and what the address was. If I don't check in by midnight tonight, they'll call the police and give them this location. This was a complete lie. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. I'd been too excited about the money to think about safety precautions. But the lie was believable enough to give them pause. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Ricardo said through gritted teeth. No, you made it complicated when you decided to traffic women instead of running a legitimate modeling agency. We stared at each other across the room. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, could feel blood dripping from my wrist onto my shoes. The crystal shard was becoming slippery now, and I had to concentrate to keep my grip on it. Behind Ricardo, I could see the computer monitors still showing the chat rooms where clients were getting impatient. They were offering more money, asking what the delay was, threatening to take their business elsewhere if the show didn't start soon. Finally, Ricardo nodded to his men. Get her out of here. Clean up this blood and reset the room. We'll use one of the other girls tonight. Vincent grabbed a towel from somewhere and roughly wrapped it around my wrist, not out of kindness, but to keep me from bleeding in their car. They hustled me through a back door I hadn't seen before, into a garage where several expensive cars were parked. The drive back to campus was terrifying in its own way. Vincent drove while another man sat beside me in the back seat, his hand resting on what I was pretty sure was a gun. They didn't speak, but the message was clear. One wrong move and I'd disappear permanently. As we got closer to the university, I started recognizing landmarks. The familiar buildings, the students walking around campus with backpacks, the normal world I'd almost lost forever. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. As I got out of the car in front of my dorm, Ricardo rolled down his window. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, we'll find you. And next time, we won't be so reasonable. We know where you live, where you work, where you go to class. We know your parents' address in Ohio, your little sister's high school, your grandmother's nursing home. Are we crystal clear? The threat was delivered in the same calm tone he might use to discuss the weather. That's what made it so terrifying. The casual way he talked about destroying my entire family. I nodded and walked into my dorm building on shaking legs, still clutching the bloody towel around my wrist. The first thing I did was call Destiny. Hey girl, how was the shoot? She asked, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. I've been thinking about you all day. In the background, I could hear music and laughter. She was somewhere public, probably celebrating her commission. You sold me to traffickers. The line went silent. The background noise continued, but I could hear her breathing change. Becca, I have no idea what you're talking about. Cut the shit, Destiny. Ricardo told me about your recruitment bonus. He told me you've been doing this for 2 years. He showed me files on all the other girls you've delivered. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed completely, becoming cold and defensive. You have no idea how much debt I'm in. Those modeling gigs barely cover my rent. My student loans are crushing me. My family's medical bills are overwhelming. I needed the money. So you decided to sell your best friend into sex slavery? It's not that bad, she said, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as me. Most girls work off their debt in a few months. The clients aren't violent. Ricardo screens them carefully. It's just performance art, really. By being raped on camera for paying customers? You're being dramatic. It's just sex work. Lots of girls do it to pay for college. At least this way it's organized and safe. Safe. She actually used the word safe. What about the girls who get relocated? What about the ones who accumulate too much debt to ever leave? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice wavered. What about Harmony, the girl who killed herself rather than continue being trafficked? Silence. How do you sleep at night? I asked. Better than I would if I were homeless, she snapped. You think this is easy for me? You think I enjoy it? But I have to survive. I hung up and immediately blocked her number on every platform we'd connected on. Then I sat on my dorm room floor and cried for 3 hours straight. The next morning, I went to the campus health center to get my wrist properly treated. The cut was deeper than I'd realized, and I needed 6 stitches. The nurse practitioner asked careful questions about how I'd been injured, and I could tell she suspected self-harm. I was attacked, I said simply. I used a piece of glass to defend myself. She nodded and didn't press for details, but she gave me information about counseling services and crisis hotlines. She also insisted on taking photos of my injury for medical records, which would later prove crucial. After getting stitched up, I walked straight to the campus police station. The officer who took my report was a middle-aged woman named Detective Torres, who specialized in crimes against women. This is the 3rd report we've had this year about fraudulent modeling agencies, she said after I'd told my story. But you're the first victim who escaped before they could complete their crime. She connected me with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. Within a week, I was sitting across from Agent Richardson, a quiet man in his 50s who'd been investigating trafficking operations for over 2 decades. Your case fits a pattern we've been tracking, he said, spreading photos across the table between us. We believe there are at least 12 similar operations on the West Coast alone, all using the same recruitment model. The photos showed young women, all college-aged, all attractive, all looking happy and confident in what appeared to be modeling headshots. Some were clearly professional photos. Others looked like social media pictures or graduation photos. These are all victims? I asked, my hands trembling as I looked through them. Confirmed victims from operations we've already shut down, but we estimate there are hundreds more we haven't found yet. Agent Richardson explained that traffickers had evolved their tactics over the past decade. Instead of kidnapping random women off the street, which attracted too much police attention, they now recruited willing participants through seemingly legitimate opportunities. Modeling agencies, acting workshops, music video casting calls, social media influencer opportunities, any situation where young women might be eager to make money quickly. Your friend Destiny represents a particularly insidious evolution, he said grimly. Instead of using strangers as recruiters, they're turning victims into accomplices. It's more effective because there's already trust established, and it's harder for law enforcement to identify the criminal network. He showed me a file on Destiny that made my stomach turn. She'd been recruited herself 2 years earlier through what she thought was a legitimate modeling opportunity. But instead of becoming a trafficking victim, she'd been offered a choice: work as a recruiter and earn substantial commissions, or be sold to clients in another city where she knew no one and had no support system. She chose to save herself by sacrificing others, Agent Richardson said grimly. It's more common than you'd think. The psychological pressure is enormous. Most people will do anything to avoid becoming victims themselves. The file contained records of her recruitment activities going back 18 months, 11 successful recruitments, dozens of attempted ones. She'd been paid over $80,000 in commissions, plus bonuses for bringing in what they called high-value targets, girls from wealthy families, students with specialized knowledge, or those with particularly marketable appearances. Over the next several weeks, I worked closely with the FBI to build a comprehensive case. They had me write detailed reports about every interaction with Destiny and Ricardo, every contract I'd signed, every location I'd visited. They even had me recreate the route to the mansion using satellite maps and street view images. The agents explained how sophisticated these operations had become. They used legitimate businesses as fronts, modeling agencies with proper licenses, photography studios with professional equipment, even talent management companies with real entertainment industry connections. The contracts were written by lawyers who specialized in finding legal loopholes, and the financial structures were designed to withstand scrutiny. The scariest part, Agent Richardson told me, is how legitimate it all appears on the surface. If we raided that mansion tomorrow, we'd find proper business licenses, tax records, employment contracts, and accounting books. On paper, everything looks legal. The hardest part was agreeing to help with an undercover operation. We need someone on the inside, Agent Richardson explained during our 5th meeting. You're the only victim who escaped before any assault occurred. That makes you credible if you claim you've reconsidered their offer. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. I'd contact Ricardo and claim I'd been thinking about his proposition. I'd wear a recording device to a meeting and get him to admit to the trafficking operation on tape. We'll have agents positioned around any meeting location, Richardson assured me. You'll never be more than 30 seconds away from backup. 3 weeks later, I was back in that same mansion, this time wearing a recording device hidden in my bra and knowing that federal agents were positioned around the property with sniper rifles and tactical equipment. I've been thinking about your offer, I told Ricardo, forcing my voice to sound calm despite my racing heart. Maybe we can work something out after all. He was immediately suspicious, his cold eyes studying my face like he was trying to read my thoughts. You seemed pretty adamant about refusing last time. In fact, you seemed willing to die rather than cooperate. That was fear talking. I've had time to think rationally about my situation. I need money for medical school and traditional jobs aren't cutting it. If this could solve my financial problems, I let the sentence hang, hoping I sounded convincing. What changed your mind? He pressed. Reality, I said. My parents' business failed. My dad's been out of work for 3 months. If I don't find a way to pay for school, I'll have to drop out and move back home. Your offer suddenly seems a lot more appealing than ruining my family financially. For the next hour, I got him to explain the entire operation in detail, how they recruited girls through fake modeling agencies, how they used fraudulent contracts to create artificial debt, how they laundered money through a network of legitimate businesses across multiple states. He even bragged about having operations in 6 different cities, with plans to expand internationally. Your friend Destiny's been particularly helpful, he said, pulling up files on his laptop. She's recruited 11 girls this year, and we've expanded into 2 new universities because of her connections in sorority life. When I asked about the other victims, he showed me photographs and fake contracts. I memorized as many names as I could. Felicia, a sophomore studying journalism who'd been told she was auditioning for a documentary. Autumn, an art major who'd dropped out after her recruitment and whose family thought she was studying abroad. Vera, whose file was marked relocated to Phoenix operation. What does relocated mean? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Sometimes girls don't adapt well to their new circumstances, he said casually. When they cause too much trouble trying to escape, refusing to cooperate, contacting family, we move them somewhere they don't know anyone, makes them more compliant. The FBI raid happened exactly at 2 Saturday p.m., just as we'd planned. Agents poured through the front door, back entrance, and what I later learned was a tunnel that connected to the gatehouse. They'd been watching the property for weeks, mapping every entrance and identifying every person who came and went. They arrested Ricardo, his photographer, Vincent, and 2 other security personnel, and 4 clients who'd arrived for auditions. In the basement, they found a sophisticated computer setup for streaming and selling footage, plus financial records showing transactions with similar operations across the country and in at least 6 other countries. During the raid, they also rescued 5 women who'd been held at the property, girls who'd accumulated too much debt to be allowed to leave. 2 were American college students, 2 were from Eastern Europe, and 1 was from the Philippines. The youngest was 16. The trial took 8 months to prepare, and another 4 months to conduct. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through every detail of my experience. Seeing Ricardo in an orange jumpsuit instead of his expensive suit felt like justice, but the process was emotionally exhausting. The prosecution presented evidence of a trafficking network that spanned 12 states and had connections to similar operations in 8 countries. They'd trafficked over 300 women in 7 years, generating over $50 million in revenue. The hardest part was testifying about Destiny's role. When they brought her into the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked smaller somehow. Like the confident woman I'd known had been hollowed out and replaced with someone desperate and broken. She'd been arrested at her apartment while trying to destroy files on her laptop. The FBI had been monitoring her communications for weeks, so they knew exactly when to strike. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pleading. "You ruined my life," she mouthed during a break in testimony. No, I thought. You ruined your own life when you decided other people's safety was worth less than your commission. During her own testimony, Destiny tried to claim she'd been coerced into recruiting, that Ricardo had threatened her family, and that she'd been too afraid to refuse. But the prosecution had evidence of her spending patterns. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, A luxury apartment she couldn't have afforded on her legitimate modeling income, even a new car she'd bought with cash. She wasn't a victim, the prosecutor said during closing arguments. She was a predator who used friendship as a weapon. She specifically targeted vulnerable young women, gained their trust, and then delivered them to be exploited. She knew exactly what would happen to them, and she did it anyway for money. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Ricardo got 25 years for trafficking, conspiracy, and running a criminal enterprise. The judge noted that his operation had shown unprecedented sophistication and cruelty. Destiny got 12 years for recruitment, conspiracy, and accessory to kidnapping. Vincent and the other security personnel got sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. The photographer got 18 years, and several clients were convicted on various charges. But the victory felt hollow. During the investigation, we'd learned the true scope of the operation. Ricardo's network had trafficked over 300 women in 7 years. Most were too traumatized to testify. Some had been moved to other cities or countries where we couldn't locate them, and several had simply disappeared from the system entirely. One girl, a 19-year-old named Harmony, who'd been recruited through a fake talent agency promising music video opportunities, had committed suicide rather than continue being trafficked. Her parents attended every day of the trial, holding photographs of their daughter and wearing buttons with her picture. During their victim impact statement, Harmony's mother said, "My daughter was a talented musician who wanted to help children through music therapy. Instead, she was destroyed by people who saw her as nothing more than a commodity." The FBI recovered files showing that Ricardo's operation was just one node in a network that spanned the entire country. There were similar operations in dozens of cities, all using the same recruitment tactics and legal loopholes. They estimated that hundreds of similar networks were operating worldwide. After the trial, I changed my major from pre-med to criminal justice with a specialized focus on human trafficking. I wanted to understand how predators like Ricardo operated, how to identify trafficking operations before they could harm victims, and how to help survivors rebuild their lives. The academic side was fascinating in a horrifying way. I learned about the economics of trafficking, how it had become the second largest criminal industry in the world, generating over $150 billion annually. I studied the psychology of both traffickers and victims, the legal frameworks that made prosecution difficult, and the social factors that made certain populations vulnerable. But the real education came from working with survivors. During my senior year, I volunteered at a residential facility for trafficking survivors. The women there had stories that made my experience seem almost mild by comparison. Many had been trafficked for years, moved between cities and countries, isolated from any support system. There was Isabella, who'd been recruited at 15 through a fake modeling agency and trafficked for 8 years before escaping. She'd been to 6 different countries and couldn't remember how many cities. When I met her, she was 25 and learning to read again. Her traffickers had deliberately kept her illiterate to make escape harder. There was May, who'd been promised a job as a nanny in America, but instead was sold to a trafficking ring that specialized in Asian women. She'd been held for 3 years before a police raid freed her, but she still woke up screaming most nights. There was Tomoko, who'd been trafficked by her own boyfriend after he accumulated gambling debts. She'd thought he loved her, even as he forced her into prostitution to pay off his loans. Their stories taught me that my experience, terrifying as it was, had been relatively brief and ended with my escape. Most victims weren't so fortunate. During my senior year, I got a call from Victim Services. Destiny was being released early for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations into other trafficking networks. "She's asked to meet with you," the counselor said. "She claims she wants to apologize and make amends." Part of me was curious. Part of me wanted closure. But mostly, I realized I didn't need anything from her. "No," I said. "I'm done with that chapter of my life." 3 weeks later, I saw her at a coffee shop near campus, the same one where she'd supposedly been discovered by Ricardo's fake modeling agency. She looked older, thinner, with the hollow eyes I'd seen in other trafficking survivors. Her expensive clothes had been replaced by thrift store purchases, and she'd cut her hair short. When our gazes met across the room, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no nostalgia for our friendship, no desire for revenge or reconciliation. She'd betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I'd survived it. I'd even helped put her and her accomplices in prison. That was enough. Today, I work for a nonprofit organization that helps trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. The work is incredibly difficult but deeply meaningful. We provide housing, counseling, legal assistance, job training, and educational support. I've spoken at law enforcement conferences in 15 states, testified before congressional committees about trafficking tactics and prevention strategies, and helped train social workers, teachers, and healthcare providers on identifying potential victims. The work is difficult. Many survivors struggle with PTSD, addiction, trust issues, and complex trauma that takes years to address. Some never fully recover from what was done to them. The recidivism rate is high. Some women return to trafficking because they don't know how to survive any other way. But every success story makes the difficult days worthwhile. Every woman who reclaims her life, finds her voice, and builds healthy relationships represents a victory against the forces that tried to destroy her. Sometimes people ask if I regret not going to medical school, if I miss the financial security and prestige that career would have provided. The answer is no. This work chose me, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Last month, I got a letter from a college freshman in Arizona. She'd seen my testimony online and realized her talent agency was using the same tactics Ricardo had used on me. Because of my story, she avoided the trap and reported the operation to authorities. They arrested 7 people and rescued 15 women. The operation had been running for 3 years and had trafficked over 50 victims. That letter reminded me why I share my story, even when it's painful and when people question why I put myself through it again by talking about my experience. Evil thrives in darkness and secrecy. Every time someone speaks up, it gets a little harder for predators to operate. I also received updates on some of Ricardo's other victims. Felicia, the journalism student, had graduated and was now working as an investigative reporter specializing in human trafficking cases. Autumn had returned to school and became an art therapist working with trauma survivors. Vera had been locate retry. This response paused because Claude reached its max length for a message. Hit continue to nudge Claude along. Continue Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.